Hello and welcome to Books Up Close, the podcast. I'm Chris Lloyd, a writer and academic, and on this show I talk to other writers about their work and their practice. We also collaborate on a close reading of their writing, looking at a particular passage or a whole poem, and talk about its meanings, resonances, and the technicalities of language. This is a show for book nerds, aspiring and established authors, or anyone interested in how texts get made. In this episode, I talk to Amy Key about a passage from her book Arrangement in Blue. We talk about the opening of the fourth section, which is called Flowers. It's on page 71 of the UK hardback edition, if you have that. Amy Key is a writer based in London. She is the author of Arrangements in Blue, as well as two poetry collections, Luxe and Isn't Forever. Thank you so much for joining me, Amy.
Oh, it's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to see you, and the podcast listeners will be sad that they can't see your wonderful cat in the background and your beautiful pink walls, which are really helping with this recording. So my first question that I've been asking everyone is, what are your thoughts on close reading as an activity or a practice? And how do you feel about close reading your work with me today?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I was contemplating this question before the podcast and realised that I haven't really given close reading a lot of thought. And I think in part that's because I didn't come up through creative writing academia, where I would have been doing this in a way that was led by an expert and really encouraged to think about writing in that way. But that's not to say that I haven't done it, because obviously as a poet, you can't avoid close reading, right? Especially when you're workshopping other people's poems and you're bringing your work to people for critique. So I guess it's poetry that provides my background in close reading. And it's probably that informs how I read my own work in prose, but also it probably influences how I read prose more than I thought about before. So it's been an interesting question for me to contemplate.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I've got two questions off the back of that. One is, how did you find the transition from writing poetry to writing non-fiction prose? And I know this book, Arrangements in Blue, started as an essay, right, that then turned into the longer book, and I wonder how you manage that move from a kind of tight condensed essay to a more extended book, and whether those two questions are even related.
I think they kind of are. They are definitely related for me. It took me a really long time to make the jump from writing poetry to prose, and a lot of that was about me giving myself permission to kind of enter what I felt were the very threatening waters of taking up more space in the literary world and writing long form, which I had told myself that I just simply couldn't do. And it's kind of weird because the rationale I used for that is kind of warped, because I would say to myself that I don't know, I didn't have the authority to write prose, and actually people who don't write poetry often think that that is a really kind of exclusive, highbrow community that isn't for everybody. Whereas I found poetry to be this democratic space where people could come from any different background and were given, the title of poet regardless of their experience and regardless of whether they were good or bad or mediocre. And I think that was probably the result of the teacher that I had. So I went into workshops with the poet Roddy Lumsden, and he that was the kind of community he created. He could be a snob and an idiot about these things and really dismissive, I guess, of some people's poetry and really favoured others. But in his classroom, I don't know, I just felt that we were all on a level playing field, regardless of where we've been. And he automatically treated me as a poet. So for me, it was this space of acceptance. And I thought that prose wasn't going to be like that. And I still don't really know if prose is or isn't that. But because I kind of was publishing quite a lot of poems, I began to get asked to write about poetry. And I thought, I'm just going to give that a go. And I found it really, really hard, if I'm honest. And I remember like the earliest reviews that I wrote for things like Poetry London or Poetry Review, I would send to my friends and be like, like help me write this. And they would, hold my hand through a lot of it. But I kind of feel like once I got like rid of the chip on my shoulder that was saying to me, "Oh, Amy, you are not allowed to have thoughts and feelings about these if you can't back them up with a shitload of theory or other examples." Once I kind of saw that there was space in responding to things in a personal way rather than necessarily a critical way, and that was my mode of writing critically, I relaxed. And so kind of that's where that came from. Very long-winded answer to the first bit of that question. But I know you were also interested in the essay. So the essay that I wrote for Granta, which was the stimulus for my book Arrangements in Blue, when I pitched it to Granta, it was an entirely different beast. So I actually pitched them an essay about the relationship of Joni Mitchell to my poetics, and again, that was very much about like, oh, I feel like I can have some authority in that space, so that's the space I'm going to write into. And it was only when I sent the first draft to the editor there, Eleanor Chandler, that she pointed out to me that like the essay was a Trojan horse for an entirely different subject, which was this preoccupation with romantic absence in my life. And that was actually what the emotional insight that I was trying to address. Yeah, I'd like built this kind of thing around it, which was this, like, oh, Joni Mitchell, poetics. I'm going to now discuss someone else's poem and talk about how Joni shows up in the lives of the melancholy poets of this land, Uh, so it was interesting to me that she sort of saw through all of my bullshit, and out of that came this completely different story.
No, and that's interesting because I've been thinking in the interview so far and here about like form quite radically, right, and really trying to take form more seriously than I think probably most newspaper reviews give a new book that comes out, right, and thinking about what can be done in that short essay form or that short essay length versus like extending it to a whole book then that becomes a memoir, right, like that has this other title that means something else, that has these other significations. And we're going to talk about a little extract from the book that's kind of later on. So I'm going to ask you to read it in a minute. But is there anything that listeners, if they haven't read it or if they have, that need to know about where this is coming in the book or what the book is generally arguing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a book about my experience of living largely without romantic love. And I use the framework of Joni Mitchell's album Blue to explore the different bits of life that I had falsely, I guess, assumed or attached to having a kind of partnered status. So I talk about the idea of creating a family home, self-esteem and kind of self-love, our ability to have kind of intimacy in our lives, travel, sex, the idea of soulmates, all of these different things that I knew were sort of burning questions in me, like, are these things for me? Can I still have them if romantic love is absent? And the songs give me a framework for thinking that through by providing like a little spur that I use to explore those questions.
Amazing. So if you could read this little extract for us, that would be great. And then we can start talking about it.
And this is from the chapter Flowers, which is the chapter about kind of self-love and self-care. And it takes a line from one of Joni's songs, which is Clean White Linen and My Fancy French Cologne. The rhetoric that you must love yourself before you can expect anyone else to love you can feel like a terrible burden. I know I've felt in a double bind. One of self-loathing, as culture tells me I will not be loved until that is overcome. And then one of dispossession, because I've listened to too many songs that tell me I am no one until somebody loves me. In that framework, the war between self-love as realization and being loved as self-realization, I lose on both sides. While self-care, in a superficial sense, can come easy, self-love can feel as remote a possibility as romantic love. If romantic love isn't a key that will unlock my self-esteem, and self-love feels threatening in its difficulty, I still need to find a shape for my life, not just for my daily routines of care, but for what I'd like to see, feel, and experience in my future. Joni's songs never tell me I'm nobody because I don't have romantic love. I'm grateful. She doesn't preach that it's only love that will make you. I find comfort in her own uncertainty about what move to make, to stay or leave, whether to dwell on what love takes from us or its gifts.
Amazing. Thank you so much. What really struck me in this passage, is why I was really interested in us reading this one, is because you do something I think about like at the level of the sentence and kind of weighing things up. I remember reading it twice when I first read this chapter. The first couple of pages, I was like, wait, not that I don't understand, but rather like, where do I sit in relation to these kind of like formulations?
Sure, yeah.
Because you open with like the rhetoric that, and you're like, okay, we're in the language of other people, right? Like in this kind of like societal discourse about what should be happening, that you must love yourself before you can expect anyone else to love you, can feel like a terrible burden. That second person you that kind of is interesting in this book, it's not one, and it becomes I, right? In that second sentence, I know I felt in a double bind, but the you is both a pulling in of like your reader, but also a kind of comment on generalized sense of like what love is supposed to be, or self-acceptance. And I really think that's an interesting way to start that chapter. So we kind of start in this kind of the language of others, and then immediately you go to, I know I've felt in a double bind. So kind of pulling from that generic to the very specific.
Yeah, I guess I really wanted people to immediately be asking themselves the same question.
Yep.
So it's something we accept as like received wisdom, right? That and I've probably even said it to other people, like, look, you have to love yourself, you know, let's forget about this other person, love yourself, and then like love is gonna like come to you like manifesting, or you know. And I just think it makes me quite angry to think about it, because it places all this responsibility on the person. It says like you're at fault, right? You have to fix yourself before you are worthy of someone else's love. And I just think that's a really cruel way of looking at things.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's something I definitely took to my therapist. And he was like, no, sometimes, you need other people to show you things, and to be in dialogue with others. And I was like, oh, okay, let's talk about this. Let's have a reading group. But here's the bit that I think that was interesting to me. Like I felt in a double bind, and you get colon, right? And you're like, okay, let's set up this debate, one of self-loathing and then one of dispossession. And that kind of, the double bind that you're talking about emotionally is also then set up at the level of the sentence, right? Like they could easily be two sentences, but instead you're kind of weighing them with those commas. As culture tells me I will not be loved until I is overcome, and then one of dispossession because I've listened to too many songs that tell me I am no until somebody loves me. And I really found, as I was reading that sentence, like, where do I weigh on those scales? Like you do feel trapped between the double bind, like as a reader, because you're like, well, these are your two options, and as the sentence is snaking, where are you gonna go? Right, the sentence is kind of snaking. You don't get a break in the sentence to be like, well, it could be.
Maybe that's to do with this, I guess, what I perceive as like a general discomfort that I have, but also I think other people have. So like maybe this is just me projecting, to be honest. A discomfort with being in the kind of ambivalent middle, where you can recognize that something is bullshit, but understand the kind of magnetism it has on your life and how it is casting everything that you think and feel about yourself. And that's definitely the kind of trapped space that I felt within, because, you know, like culturally, all of the things that I feel about myself and my relationship to romantic love have like built in such small increments over such time. Like I feel like a slice of rock that has got all these different types of sediment, and someone's asking me to try and like obliterate something that has been in there for millennia, and it's really, really deep down, and like how am I supposed to kind of get that out of my system, even if my rational mind can marshal its arguments against it, right? It's interesting how you're reading it, because like I probably wasn't conscious of doing that in the text.
No, but that's good. This is what everyone has said so far, and that's the thing. I think it's important. I think for readers who aren't in, like as you said, in these creative writing spaces or in like workshops or classrooms, to think about what authorial intention, or like maybe that's a stupid idea, right? That actually like some of these stuff is coming up unconsciously. It's happening with rhythm. It's how it sounds on the page, and what a reader can see in a text that maybe the author isn't even thinking about in any kind of conscious way. Like that to me is interesting to kind of think about with a wider listenership. Because you also, one of the other things I think about this passage is it is about the coercive power of language, right? Like the rhetoric of "you must love," and then I've listened to too many songs that say "I am no one until somebody loves me," and I'm thinking about particular songs that use that line, right? But it's almost like you're caught between different kinds of language, like the language of culture that's saying "you must be X," the language of music that's saying "you must be X," and then your own language that's like, how do I sit in relation to those things? And there's something about words themselves that are doing some damage in this process too.
I think you're right. Like when I was writing the book, I had all of these epigraphs for each chapter. And I remember like one of them was a song by the Crystals, which was something like, "If you're going to hurt somebody, please hurt me." Which, this idea of like romantic damage as a compelling thing on my psyche, which doesn't directly relate to this particular chapter, but it links to that idea of the different levels that language is operating on, and how you're kind of, I don't know, all of this stuff is sticking to you like you're a bit of sellotape and you're picking up fluff off the floor or something, or like you're debobbling your sweater and you've got cat hair and you've got all sorts of stuff on it. Well, that's just me because of my cats, but it's quite hard to like pick apart how all of those things have combined and produced this worldview that you have, or like that I am exploring in this chapter, which is I talk to myself in a way I would never talk to a friend. And I have accepted as fact things about love, my own lovableness and my capacity to be like a kind, loving friend to myself, that if a friend was talking to me about, I would want to completely dismantle. But the kind of the bad thing is that we're all like that pretty much. We're all subject to this negative self-talk, and we treat other people entirely differently. It's like an insult to our intelligence, the way that it's like, why am I doing this to myself?
There's a bit later on where you talk about letting other people take photographs of you where they think you look good in them and believing them and trusting in that. That went in my notebook immediately. I was like, right, that's it. I'm no longer gonna judge like what other people put photos of me online or whatever. Like that really stuck with me as a kind of form of seeing this self through others and doing it in a tender way.
Yeah. And it can be really hard, because like if you're confronted with an image that doesn't align with your self-image, it can be really confronting. But I don't want to kind of try to police how other people perceive me, through that.
And then the next line in that framework, here we're going to get nerdy, everybody.
Okay.
You might want to fast forward if you're not interested in end dashes, but in that framework, end dash, the war between self-love as realization and being loved as self-realization, I lose on both sides. And then while self-care, end dash, in a superficial sense, end dash can come easily. So you've got two of these back to back, right? These sentences where there's this kind of parenthetical bit. Then the first one, it's the framework. But again, the balancing act, right? Like in the sentence before, you did that as kind of clauses within clauses, right? This kind of long flowing sentences. And here it's in that framework, here's one thing and here's the other thing. I lose on both sides. And it's almost like you're demonstrating to us the kind of dangers of black and white thinking, right? It's like either this or this. But you do it in that little, okay, so why n dashes, not m dashes, right? Like, and why not brackets, right? Like, what is that little parenthetical bit doing, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I really wish I had a smart answer. I think I use end dashes a lot in poetry. I kind of think of them as like little annotations in the text, and aesthetically, I'm more drawn to them, like how they look on the page. Like a lot of the when I write poems in particular, I think of punctuation as a kind of adornment, and there are certain adornments that I find ugly. Semicolons is one, probably. Colon, I'm not even a massive fan of the colon, and I think when you've got too many commas, it can, yeah, I get a bit lost and confused. So my preference, I've just got a preference for the end dash. I don't use end dashes because they feel like quite an American form of punctuation, even though like they're quite appealing, but I'm not sure if I'm like chic enough to just drop in a load of end dashes. And I think that end dash has this kind of more like rapid kind of, like I say, like that little scribbled in annotation, which is, please think about this with this other thought in mind. Like I want to just give you this other thing, but I don't want to tell you what to think, you know?
See, I love an M dash because it joins the letters together.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
things that the space in an M dash, like that's a different to me. But there is something about like giving some room, right there in that sentence, like think and breathe. I also think we should go back to like Emily Dickinson's time, right, and writing those dashes like in all different directions, right? Like she was not confined to the short or long. She was just like, it's going to go upwards or downwards or.
That's just yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of Emily Dickinson too, so that's probably a little bit why I'm in the dash.
Yeah, I'm like, if any poet uses a dash, I'm like, Emily, like, what are we doing
Yeah.
here?
Hello, Emily.
So yeah, I think the sentence is starting to do some of the intellectual work as well. It's like demonstrating the emotional intellectual work as well as just describing it. And then while self-care can come easy, self-love can feel as remote as a possibility as romantic love. If romantic love isn't a key, like I'm interested in the kind of you turning around these phrases that like seem to be conflatable, right? Self-love, self-care, romantic love. Like they're similar kinds of words, but what you're trying to do is pass out the kind of differences between them and how they linger or register. And I think that little bit is quite interesting because it's almost, if you heard it quickly, it would sound repetitive, but actually you're slowly trying to say like there are minute differences here, and how do we think about them? And I think that's quite interesting to me in such a small paragraph, that you return to those same ideas that might seem repetitive, but is actually trying to aim for clarity or something.
Yeah, and I think that it was really important for me in this book to try to demarcate between these different types of love, right? Romantic love is one thing. Self-care is sold as a thing that will generate a feeling of self-love. And later in this chapter, I kind of land in the space of, actually, for me, it would be more helpful to think about self friendship. And that links back to this idea of how I aspire to treat myself as I would want to treat a friend who, yeah, was talking to me. But I think, like, in our culture, all of this stuff becomes like totally enmeshed, you know. So this idea of, you gotta love yourself if you want someone to like treat you with respect and love you, yeah, which I think is phony and like a bogus idea. And the commodification of the word self, you know, self-care and self-love, it's just something that is marketed and sold rather than an actual like product of like self-inquiry and care and friendship towards yourself, which is something for me that's very distinct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think then, you then start to think, if romantic love isn't a key that will unlock my esteem, I still need to find a shape. So then you got the voice kind of changes a little bit. It becomes a bit more speculative, right? You're like, well, here's the bind. Now what comes? And then we get a break. Also, we could talk about this, like your paragraphs have space between them rather than like indents, and whether that's a conscious choice too. I'd be interested to know. We then move to Joni's, right? And it's Joni's songs. And almost that line feels like the register is slightly different, right? We've suddenly got into this much more intimate space of Joni songs. Like she's your best friend here, right, in this book. And we've moved from like the rhetoric of like the world versus Joni songs never tell me. Like it's much more intimate, much softer.
Yeah.
And those songs never tell me I'm nobody. full stop, I'm grateful, full
Yeah.
stop. Like the shortest sentence we've had in this whole chapter, right? And that I'm grateful like feels so huge, right? Like you could have a 3-line sentence previously, but that I'm grateful is small but massive emotionally.
Yeah, I guess it was important for me to like show why is Joni helping me tackle this question, right? Let's write down, let's pause here, and I want to talk to you about that. So I guess that's what I'm doing there, and that's probably why when I feel like I'm kind of beginning a new thought, I want a paragraph break, and I want to kind of signal that actually we're going somewhere else now. Yeah.
No, because I talk a lot about that with my students, right? Like what a break versus like an indented paragraph does for a reader, like how that makes the reading experience and what that breath in between is going to do or not do. Then I love, she doesn't preach that it's only love that will make you. I find comfort in her own uncertainty about what move to make, to stay or leave. Like I cannot but hear that, like, it feels almost iambic, right? Like what move to make, to stay or leave. Like it starts to flow in a really soft way that's quite different from like the lines above that were all about this kind of syntactical balancing, right? This or this, and then actually we move into a softer
Yeah.
register.
And I think part of that is trying to like mimic, I guess, the rhythm and cadence of the lyrics. I'm aware of that now that you say it and now that I read it, but I wasn't consciously trying to do that, but it is something that I subconsciously did. So I must have had like some little hidden intent there that was, okay, we're going to get a bit like melodious here.
Yeah, you hear it and you hear the, even the what move to make, like the alliteration of that is like a soft alliteration. Like I think these things that kind of permeate the language in different ways. Like you're also trying to say, like the language of Joni that's both kind of written and sonic is a whole different place from that rhetoric of, cliche of like, you must do X.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm a bit grumpy. Like I'm grumpy when I'm starting this chapter, and I've got like I've got a bone to pick, and like I want you to kind of walk with me while I talk it out, and then I'm like, okay, let's borrow some music. Let's borrow some music to now think about it. And when I was writing, I would always read back to myself aloud, which is what I do with poetry, to see how it feels to say, and in my mouth, like as I'm forming the words, and also like rhythmically, how is it feeling? And there were times when I did have to pull back from going like full poem core, you know. But I feel like it's really important to my practice, and how like the sentences kind of balance and way. I'm just testing it out, and I respond to my ear. I'm probably not responding. So I'm responding to my ear on the level of instinct rather than, like counting my beats and, thinking about meter and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and then that's one of the points I think I'm trying to like explore with people is that, we can identify these metric feet or whatever, but some of it is instinctual. Some of it's like it's through the body that you feel it and hear it and make sense of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to ask you some questions about your writing process. This is like a nice transition. But one question I had that I didn't write down was, were you playing the Joni songs on repeat as you were writing those chapters, or did you go back to them? I know obviously you know the album back to front, but was there a sense of hearing it as you were writing or not?
So I need silence to write. So I can't sit there and like have Joni on in the background as I'm writing. It doesn't really work for me like that. But I would often listen to her when I was like out driving or walking around, and I would make notes of different kind of emotional experiences or life experiences that I felt connected to the songs. So I would have that, and I would refer to it. I would refer to the lyrics a lot, but I didn't ever write alongside listening.
No, that's interesting to me. I was trying to think about where that was sitting in relation to the background, because each chapter is kind of taking one of those songs, and I wondered how weaved in it was to the writing process. I also can't write with any sound. It has to be dead silence, otherwise my brain I just want to listen to the song.
Yeah, and like it's interesting because now when I listen to that album, I don't think about my book at all. Like, it's not like I'm suddenly like, oh yeah, and in my chapter I talk about this line. It's just like Joni, the songs, they're Joni's. I still listen to them as I did when I was like 20 years old or whatever.
Yeah. No, that's great. Do you have or did you for this book have a strict writing process? Do you have like practices, rituals? Are you doing it in a particular place? Are there snacks on the table?
So I wrote this while I was working full time, and also it was during the pandemic when I was working not just full time but often several hours beyond my working hours a day and over weekends, and because I was working in the health sector and it was a really intense time. I often wrote for an hour before work and at the weekends and using all of my holiday. So that's how I did it. I don't actually know how I managed it now, if I'm completely honest. Especially as like I'm trying to work on something new at the moment, and I've taken a bit of time out of full-time work and seemingly can't write at all when that's not happening. So maybe it was the ideal conditions for me to write. In terms of where I write in bed largely. I write in bed. If I get stuck, I move into my living room and I sit at my dining table and I write there. When I get really, really stuck, I go out for a drive or something and I just try and think a little bit, and then might send myself some voice notes. And then at the end of the day, if I've been writing, I quite often have like thoughts that rise to the surface, and then I just send them to myself by email, and I wake up, I've got like 6 emails with these fragmented thoughts. So I wouldn't recommend my writing practice to anybody. I think it probably leads to a very bad back. It means that all of your ideas are just like cast to the four winds because I'm not really collecting them in any sensible place. And now I'm so easily distracted that I have to use like white noise to. So I do have sound now. I used to have complete silence, but now I have the sound of rushing water, which is one of the things that I find helps me focus. I wish I had like a more chic writing practice, but I just don't. I have to be alone. I can't write in a coffee shop. I like to be in bed. It feels safe. I don't need any snacks while I'm writing.
You're not the first person I've interviewed to say they write in bed, so don't worry. You're all chic to me. Is that the same with poetry? Is the same? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same. But poetry is like a more potent, intense form. Sometimes you can write a whole poem, in under an hour or something, and you're like, yeah, I done it, I smashed it, and you get this incredible dopamine hit and feel fantastic, and it's done, right? But writing long form is never done, and you have to have this stamina, and that's probably the transition that I found really challenging. Is like having the stamina to just keep going back to the same thing again and again, particularly when I'm revising or responding to comments and edits, or just like trying to do the push the word count so that I had enough material to bring it into a good form. Really hard. Much harder than I.
That's why I write poems, because it's quite instant. It's quite you get the hit. And you're like, great, I did a thing today. Well done me. Do you have a memory of first writing? Do you remember the first time you started writing, or even the first time you were reading quite consciously?
I probably. Well, I used to keep a diary when I was a teenager. I no longer do that. So there was my diaries, and then I started to write. Like, I guess you would call it flash fiction, although it wasn't. This was the early 90s, so it wasn't called flash fiction then. But I wrote these like little stories and poems when I was about 18, 19. And I think that's the first time, other than in school, that I wrote creatively. Apart from, I thought I wrote a brilliant story for my GCSE English, which I later realised I totally ripped off Janice Galloway's book, The Trick is to Keep Breathing, and did not. I thought I was a stone cold genius, and my English teacher wrote in it, "I can't wait to read this published one day." But later on, I realised there was a significant element of plagiarism, which I didn't consciously. So it's a good job I didn't submit it anyway, because that might have ended my career before it even began.
I love this. Amy Key
Yeah,
cancelled
exactly.
for GCSE plagiarism. Are there any books you wish you'd written?
Oh, I mean, there are so many books that I really admire. But like, it's so hard to like imagine yourself into having written them, right? So like, if I think of something like Catherine Scanlon's "Kick the Latch" is a book that I just like vibrates in my brain like long, years after I first read it. Or a book that I read recently, and it's called On the Calculation of Volume. The author is Solveig Ball. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that right or not, but it's a book in 7 volumes that are about a woman who is like trapped in the same day. And it's just like the audacity of writing 7 volumes of it is just so funny and brilliant to me. But the kind of immersion and the skill that it takes to make that engaging for the reader and compelling to keep going over like such a long time frame. I've only read the first 2 volumes, but I'm like, what a brilliant idea! What an incredible writer! So I don't often feel like I wish I'd written that. I just feel like deep admiration for other people's skill. I sometimes envy their imagination or like their sentences and think, oh, I wish I could do that. But I feel like we should only be writing the books that only us can write. So that's the thing that I come back to.
No, that's great. Like, I always wonder if I should ask that question, but there are certain books that, like, when I finished it, I was like, I wish I were capable of that, or I wish I had been able to do something like that that feels so
Yeah.
close to maybe my sensibility or aesthetic, perhaps. That was like, that feels like it's something that's within my world, but somehow I'm not able to articulate that.
Yeah, so for example, I read recently Sean Fay's book that's coming out in February, Love in Exile, and to a certain extent, like we're writing into the same space, except like I'm not a queer trans person, for example. So like Sean is bringing this entirely different perspective to it, and she's writing like beautiful memoir, but she's also bringing in kind of quite a lot of like cultural criticism too. And I wish sometimes that I could write in that space, but it's not. I just can't do it. But I'm like thrilled that Sean has, you know. So I know what you mean. Like sometimes you're like, this is a book I could have written if I was this completely different person. So that's how I often think about it.
Yeah. Maybe that is what you've been saying, right? Like showing a tenderness to oneself and saying, like, you write the book that
Exactly.
you need to write, not this other
Exactly.
thing.
Because you don't want to be feeling like all of these other books that are actually contributing to a conversation that's really important to you are somehow threatening. They're not. Like it's all adding to the culture of the question that you're really interested in exploring. So that's the way I try to think about it.
The final question, like, you've recommended 3 beautiful books there, so like those are great. Were there any others, or were there any books about writing, like as craft? I'm putting craft in quote marks.
There's 2 that I use a lot. One is Vivian Gornick's The Situation and the Story, about the art of personal narrative, which I just find, well, I think it's brilliant, but also I just found it really helpful because like what she talks about is the idea of understanding what the story is and what your situation is and how those 2 things aren't the same. And quite often we think about story as like the events of a life, and we think that that gives us the story. So like maybe it's divorce, that isn't the story, right? That is the situation that you're in. The story is about like what are the emotional insights that you can derive from that experience and how you're going to access them, because divorce in itself is not interesting. Yeah, so she writes about that, and I find it really helpful and use it in teaching a lot. And the other one is Melissa Fabos's Bodywork, which I really love.
That's always on my list. That's the one. If anybody asked me the question, that would be my instinctive response. So I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, yeah, it's really great. And I was like, when I got it, I for some reason I don't think I really understood what the book was, and I was like, oh, this is a craft book. I was like expecting something else. And then like I picked it up again and I was like, oh, holy shit, this is so helpful. Thank God this book exists. And I particularly love like the stuff that she writes about in terms of like the dilemmas of writing about your own life and the lives of others. And there's just a lot of wisdom in there and ways of thinking about personal writing that I think are really helpful and seem to really resonate when I talk to students and others about it.
That's amazing. I will link to that. And she's got a new book coming out this year called The Dry Season.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read
That's
this.
another thing that, that sort of book, it like plays into this kind of cultural story, doesn't it? About the role that love is playing in our lives and its absence and its presence and sexual desire and all of this kind of stuff. So I'm really can't wait to read that one.
Yeah, I think we can put those three on a syllabus together, right? You've got Amy's book, you've got Sean's book, and then Melissa's book. If anyone is teaching that module, please get in touch and let us know. That'd be great to know. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for your time. I really appreciate it. This was great.
Oh, it's really nice to chat to you. I'm excited to listen to all the other episodes.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a review and share with people you know. You can also follow the show and me on Instagram at Books Up Close and on YouTube. And if you can, please do fill out the feedback form linked in the show notes. It's really helpful to us. You can get show transcripts and more information by subscribing to the Substack. This show is made possible by an Impact Accelerator Award from the University of Hertfordshire and the Arts and Humanities Research Council.